Hello and welcome to the Effective Literacy Podcast. I am Victoria.
And I'm Anna.
And we're excited to have you with us today. If you're joining us for the first time, Anna and I want to tell you a little bit about the purpose of this podcast. This podcast is really about sharing our passions for reading and all things literacy. We've really noticed that literacy opens doors to reading and language skills through that meaningful engagement. We've also noticed that there's been a recent escalation of research and opinions around what are the best practices when it comes to reading instruction, specifically the role of phonics in reading instruction. So to better understand that research, we are interviewing experts from across the nation with extensive knowledge in literacy and multilingual education to discuss how to support our students, specifically our multilingual learners, in becoming literate individuals by the time they graduate from our schools.
Today, we are so excited to be chatting with Cristina Sánchez-López. Welcome, Cristina.
Hi, so happy to be here. Thanks.
So listeners, let me tell you a little bit about Cristina before we jump right into our tough questions. So Cristina Sánchez-López is a senior associate at Paridad Education Consulting, where she consults with educators in the United States and Canada on many issues related to the education of multilingual learners, including developing culturally and linguistically sustaining multi-tiered systems of support, bilingual special education, middle school mathematics. She works with curriculum educators who serve dual language learners, and Cristina has taught at elementary, middle, and university levels in the US and Mexico. She currently teaches graduate and undergraduate courses in multilingual education, and she's authored a number of publications on the education of multilingual learners. So Cristina, welcome. Before we begin, did we leave anything out? You want to tell us a little bit about your expertise in literacy and multilingualism?
Well, the thing that's not on there is that my husband and I raised our daughter bilingually. And it's not an easy task in the U.S. and English-speaking countries to do that, but we're happy to say that it was a tough road, but she embraced bilingualism and now multilingualism. So I think that's something that we're so happy and pleased that we were able to do and try to support parents and educators to help their children do the same. So that's all.
That's fantastic. No, absolutely. Let's talk about your beliefs and your actions coming into alignment, right? So let's think then if that's, how you're making sure that your daughter is in a system that supports that. Let's take it then to the classroom and the school level. Victoria and I are always looking for different perspectives to help us to clarify what should be happening in the classroom if our goal is to produce literate multilingual students. So to you, from your perspective, what does effective literacy look like and sound like? And of course, we want you to really highlight the multilingualism.
So being in classrooms with either young children or school-age students and seeing that they're reading, writing, speaking, and listening, so using all of those language domains and using them for something meaningful. So coming into a classroom and hearing children talk about and investigate and write about maybe a scientific inquiry, something related to history. So, creating these timelines based on something they're researching. So they're reading and writing and talking with colleagues, some sort of, discovery. And also doing, using their language and literacy. I don't separate the two. So language and literacy for something that has a purpose. So they're doing it to communicate, to analyze a problem, to learn, to advocate. So that's really important. And I also see and hear children engaging or students engaging in literacy independently, sometimes with a partner, sometimes small group, sometimes whole group, hearing things read to them, writing together as a group or a small group or individually. So that collaborative, both reading and writing and talking and peer interaction is really important. So, I mean, so you can, when you say, what does it sound like? So you can hear that literacy happening, right? And so, while comprehension is like that invisible thing that's happening in their head, but we can see and hear when students are making meaning, when they're understanding, when they're making connections, they're asking questions and so forth. So, that's what I, see and hear when it's effective literacy. And I wanted to share just a framework that my colleague John Hilliard at Paridad uses. The idea is this house metaphor, and it's really made a big impact on me in my work with schools in terms of like curriculum development and instruction. And he uses this house metaphor to talk about the range of language and literacy that students should engage in every like content lesson or every unit that they're studying. And so what the idea is that the house represents the genre or discourse level of language and literacy. So, where are we headed in this science unit or the math unit or social studies, history, language arts? What is it that we're trying to build? Is it, I was putting an example I was thinking of was like a weather forecast. If that's one of the things that you want the children to be able to sort of produce, so think about what the weather forecast would require. So they have to do the research on the climate, on the temperature, be able to read instruments, all those pieces, because that's the house they're building with their language and literacy is this weather forecast in this unit, this, let's say, weather or science unit. So then he talks about the walls are the sentence level of language and literacy that or phrases that the students need to build that particular genre or discourse. So there is language in creating a weather forecast that is unique to creating a weather forecast. And they're not going to use it anywhere else other than unless they have this opportunity to do it here. So there are different kinds of sentence types and phrases. And then he talks about the bricks, are the vocabulary that is unique to that particular genre or house, or particular structure that they're trying to build. And I really love that because a lot of work that we do in like unit planning focuses on the word level, which is good. But if we go back to the point that students need to have a purpose for why they're engaging in language and literacy, why we're doing this, the genre or the house that they're building is really points us all in the right direction, right? So that's what's going to determine for this particular unit, what kinds of sentences, what kinds of models we need or mentor texts we need for them, what video, text and other types of things or media they're going to have to look at to be able to create their own, right? And then the sentence types and the vocabulary.
I want to kind of think about if I'm a classroom teacher and these decisions that I'm making and using, materials to plan, but also really relying on my pedagogy and my classes that I took in my credential program, building this house dependent on genre content, making sure that I'm thinking all the way down to the sentence and to the word level. But can you share a little bit about how do I make sure that the decisions that I'm making are also culturally and linguistically responsive, really considering if I have, monolingual and multilingual learners in my classroom, how do I make sure that the house that I'm building is, not just responsive, but really sustaining of my different learners?
Yeah, thank you for that question, because when I think of culturally, linguistically responsive and sustaining teaching and learning, it really is. I think about these different elements. I think, well, the students have to see themselves. So are some of the discourse or genres that we're choosing, let's say if it's in a unit, I'm just thinking on the fly here, like a unit about the civil rights movement, right? Or so what are the different genres in that unit that they're going to study? Some of them are going to be protest songs, some of them are going to be poetry, some of them are going to be formal speeches. there are, 5, 6, 7 different types of genre that are in that. So the content itself is responsive to representative of the students who are in the classroom in front of us. And then we're careful to choose a wide variety of these genres or discourse. So students are learning all different kinds of reading, writing, speaking, and listening. And the other thing is to get to know our students, to really, this is just if I can give a little anecdote, I was going to model a lesson in the classroom, and it was in, I think it was 6th grade classroom, and with a team of teachers. And so I let them know, I have this week available. So they chose like Friday afternoon, last period of the day.
Of course.
I thought, okay, all right. And then I just kept thinking, this is going to bomb unless I know these students, right? Because they don't know me. I'm nobody to these students, right? I have to learn a little bit about them through the teachers. And it was going to be a lesson on making inferences, because they said the students were having difficulty with that. So then I wrote to the teachers, the team, and I said, oh, can you tell me a little bit about your students? And so they sent me back a spreadsheet with like initials and then all their test scores. So I thought, oh, okay, well, the thing I learned about from that was I could tell what their level of English proficiency was, but that's not what I meant to ask. So then I wrote back, I said, I'm so sorry, I didn't ask this correctly. What I meant was like, tell me about your kids. Like, what do they like to do? What do they talk about? Because I want to build that into the lesson. And so they wrote back immediately. They had a spreadsheet, same initials and the categories. I don't remember all of them, but it was like hobbies, travel, like interests, what they talk about, it was beautiful. And they said to me in a very poignant way, they said, oh, Cristina, sorry, we didn't send that to you first, but no one ever asks us for that. This notion that, they know their students, but like no one else cares about that. That it's really about the numbers and every other sort of setting, but they knew their students. And so then I proceeded to, create this lesson around, making inferences, but using images from all the different interests. And it was beautiful. And if anybody's interested, I can share the lesson with them. But it grew out of knowing them, and then it was Friday afternoon. We didn't actually get to every single piece. You always overplan. But I had extra things. And I asked, the students, I have extra pictures and extra thing that we didn't get to. Does anybody want this? They all raised their hand. The reason that worked was, and they felt successful and affirmed, is because the teachers knew them, and it made all the difference in the world. So that notion of getting to know your students and having them reflect, and then building on strengths. A lot from the bio, you've talked a little bit about the work I do. I typically am working at that interface.
Cristina, I'm connecting with this idea of knowing our students, really making sure that we're honoring their language, that they're building on their strengths, that we're really making our curriculums meaningful and relevant. So I kind of want to touch on this idea of the characteristics of the effective curriculum, right? Which you've hit on those a little bit, but also how do teachers prioritize, right? Where I have all of these resources in front of me that came in this beautiful box, right, from the publisher. How do I prioritize? Where am I going to get the most bang for my buck and really support my students where they are?
So writing, science, social studies, math units, or typically science and social studies. I don't know if anybody writes them anymore. I mean, I work with teachers a lot, and we write their science unit or their social studies units, or but oftentimes they, in terms of literacy, for example, especially in the younger grades, they get like a box or a kit with, and so one of the main things is really looking at the texts that are there. I mean, I would do that even with, just looking at the standards, for for the different content areas as well as language arts. And then what about the texts in this kit that we've gotten? Are they connected in any way to a theme so that we can teach them sort of together, as thematic? This idea of narrow reading, right? So to go in depth into a topic. So it's nice when the literacy materials are given to us that way. And I think maybe more and more publishers are sort of realizing they need to do that. And so otherwise, I would just really try to align them with the standards. Like, what are the science and social studies standards for your grade? And then what of these books that are in this literacy kit that we've gotten sort of match up with it. So at least the units are thematic. That's in terms of literacy. And so I didn't really get that as a teacher. Like, I got textbooks, and then I worked with my colleagues. It was just an amazing teaching experience. I taught at the middle school primarily. I mean, I taught elementary school some. I wasn't very good at it, I have to say. I honor elementary teachers, right? And then I taught middle school, and I loved middle school. And so many people don't understand how that could be. But it's the same thing. Like, I honor my teachers in secondary and my elementary and early childhood colleagues. They're amazing at what they do. And but we had opportunities in the summer to write our curriculum, and so we had the standards, and then we had a budget for a certain amount of texts, books, and we did get like a textbook, so we had a reference that was beautiful. We had English and Spanish, beautiful materials. And then we would write our units. And so we got to write units that embedded language arts standards into science and into math and into social studies. So we had time to do that. So we also had our separate language arts time, but we had this opportunity to make sure. And what was really beautiful about that was that we worked together.
Anne and I are big advocates that no matter, how old that we get, no matter, how deep into our professional life that we get, that we are always still going to be readers and writers, right? That we always are going to identify ourselves as literate individuals, and we're going to embrace that literacy. And so we really have one last question to ask you. What are you currently reading or writing?
Well, we just wrote a paper. My colleagues and I, for the National Dual Language Forum, we just did a paper on, it's called Welcoming Bilingual Learners with Disabilities into the Dual Language Classroom. And it's free, and it's on the Center for Applied Linguistics website. We'll send that along. And so that's beautiful. It was worked during the pandemic, so it was a labor of love, I would say, yeah. And I've also been reading a lot about qualitative assessment practices, but across different disciplines, not necessarily education. And what I've been finding, and I do want to write something about this, is how important the narrative and qualitative data is in so many across so many fields, and even what we consider hard sciences, that almost that help to contextualize and help people interpret the numeric or quantitative, and that they need to be together to make sense. And it's profound for me, because so much of what we do in school is look at quantitative measures that are decontextualized out of context to determine the future of a child. And we think that that's more rigorous. And yet every other discipline that I've found, some even saying, well, yeah, the numbers are actually garbage without the context. I mean, that's pretty strong, pretty strong language. So I'm hoping to write something about that, because I think we need to get away from this thought that only the quantitative measures that are put out by, publishers are the end of everything. Whereas we know learners are complex. Learning is complex. And so assessment, has to be much more authentic and connected to what kids are really doing. And so that teaching, assessing kind of connection to be a lot closer. so you I don't know if you like this was included in it, but like my all-time favorite book. So a nerdy thing is that I love reading biographies of physicists, and it's amazing to me. They're just amazing lives, and well, one of the reasons, I mean, they always have findings and breakthroughs throughout their whole career, but a lot of their main work is when they're very young. You know, they're like teens and early 20s and like 30s. And so one thing I'm inspired about their work is that I think about, wow, they knew who they were pretty early on if their major breakthroughs are coming at that young age. And again, I worked a lot with adolescents. I thought it would be so beautiful if through schooling, children got to know who they were as learners and like what their strengths were and their abilities, so that they would come into middle school being, yeah, this is who I am. This is what I know. This is what I'm going to do. And it's a dream of mine, right? Like that's that potential, so that, you know, they can do their really great work early on, right? They don't need to wait to be who they're going to be. They can be that person. But what I love, the book is called The Pleasure of Finding Things Out. My husband gave it to me for my birthday, and it's the short works of Richard Feynman. And he was a Nobel Prize, he's in theoretical physics. And I was teaching in the classroom when I got it, and it really helped me because he talked about the importance of understanding. So when my students ask me, well, why, you know, in math or in science, like we need to know why. Yeah, like why is this? I don't want to just know the algorithm. I don't want to just memorize this fact. I mean, my students would say that to me, you know. So I thought, okay, we need to know the why and understand, not just because that's enduring, right? Not just memorizing things. And he talks a lot about curiosity and meaning making and figuring things out and questioning. And so it's forever been an inspiration to me, his writing. And he always wrote and talked like just a regular guy, you know, from New York, you know, and he was this, you know, really brilliant thinker. And I really appreciated his focus on, you know, teaching for understanding and learning for understanding, not just for the short term, you know, memorizing this thing or this skill, but to really know and apply it in a lot of contexts. So that's
I can see that lesson of really knowing the why from that physicist perspective, but you've actually applied it to your life's work as a teacher and as an educator, and knowing your students and really thinking about why we're making the choices that we're making in the classroom. So you've given us so much to think about, Cristina. It's really just been a pleasure to listen and learn from you today. We're so thankful that you were joining for us. And listeners, we thank you for listening. We are the Effective Literacy Podcast. All of those amazing resources that Cristina shared, we will get them into the show notes so that you can have access to them. And for more information about those resources or other information about the podcast, please visit our show notes at multilingualliteracy.org and make sure to subscribe to the podcast.